Yeah, good morning and welcome to yet another webinar on the series that the Institute of Economic Affairs has been holding every month on what we're calling the Industry 254 conversations. Yes, my name is John Mutua. I work at the Institute of Economic Affairs as a programs coordinator. The IEA is a think tank that promotes debate and dialogue on public policy issues. There are 6 policy areas that the IEA works around. And what we do in those areas is just basically to generate research, and we use that research for evidence-based policy conversations and policy engagement. So today, this morning, we have Leo Kemboi, who is a program officer, and he works in the Constitution Law and Economy program. So this morning you'll be flying solo. Otherwise, these Industry 254 conversations are usually done as a tag team, in a duet of Kemboi and our Chief Executive Officer, Kwame Owino. But yeah, today Kemboi will present this by himself. Now, today's topic or focus will be on what Kemboi is calling a review of PIIE, which stands for Peterson Institute for International Economics. That organization is actually based in the US. So the conversation today will be based on a review of their study on 50 years of the US industrial policy from 1970 to the year 2020. And so in this review, obviously the main question that will be, the focus will be on the lessons that Kenya can pick from the US's industrial policy. So of course, I will not delve much into that because Kembo will break it down for us. So just to mention, this is the 3rd series for this year. The 2 previous webinars have actually focused on the first one the one in January focused on standard levies, and the previous one was on industrial capacity and performance. So again, we'll be continuing touching on different topics, and the idea is to enrich, or the main objective is to enrich discussions around industry, the manufacturing sector in Kenya, given obviously the challenges that this sector has faced over the years, the fact that it has stagnated, and yet obviously its benefits are huge in terms of job creation, revenue generation, and so on. So the idea is to continue to pick different issues for conversations as a way of obviously informing debate and discussions or discourse around what can be done to unlock or address some of the challenges or bottlenecks that the Kenya's industrial sector has been facing over the years. So I'll leave it at that in terms of intro, and then before I invite Kemboi just to share a few things in terms of housekeeping or just basically rules of engagement. So what we'll do, we will obviously, Kemboi will spend not more than 30 minutes to present or share his presentation. And then obviously thereafter we'll open it up for Q&A. So we'll follow the same drill. As the presentation goes on, if you have any question that you'd like to pose or something that you, in case you don't want to forget, please feel free to jot it or note it in the chat box or in the Q&A provision for the Q&A. So you can note those questions as the presentation goes along. And obviously once that is done, then we'll open it up for plenary. Okay, so without further ado, I would like to welcome Kemboi to take us through his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Hi, everyone. apologies. My co-convener Kwame is away to attend a growth conference. So we found this very interesting study that evaluated a US 50 years of US industrial policy, and obvious the best lesson is to always learn from those who've already succeeded or failed, so that because there is an economic cost to these issues. So just to highlight, this is the study. It's written by two economists, Eugene and Gary, and they are think tankers just like us from the Peterson Peterson International, an economics think tank in the US. We intend to replicate such study, but use Kenyan case examples. So just to get into it, we have the study been in two parts. One part is to just highlight what the study is about. The second part is to give lessons. So one of the things that they realized is that there are many forms of industrial policy, and in the analysis they undertook, they examined 18 case examples. I'll present some of the select case examples, but there are 18 in total. But they realized that all these case examples can be put together into three large buckets, which is one, industrial policy through trade measures. And then the second one is the industrial policy through subsidies targeted to specific farms. And then the third one is industrial policy through public and private R&D. And all these, as I've discussed, is along 18 case examples. So the approach of evaluation, the way they evaluated this is there are three questions that policymakers normally use to make. There are three hypotheticals that policymakers used to justify industrial policy. One is that the industry will make in the case of the US farms to be more competitive in international and also the national markets. The second issue is to save jobs. The third issue is to advance technology. And then the way they have evaluated is they gave it an A, B, C, D example. You can't see my, Emmanuel, you can't see my presentation. You can't see the presentation. Let me reload. Can anybody else confirm that they can see the presentation? John, Justus.
Yeah, yes, I confirm that that I can see. It's actually visible. So
Okay, maybe Emmanuel, you can
restart. Yeah, maybe
you can
for
restart
Emmanuel, he needs to
and
reset.
rejoin. Yeah.
Then you can let us know again. Yeah, but it's visible.
So there are three
Yeah, you can go
main.
ahead.
Yeah. There are three main issues, which is, are you making the markets competitive nationally and internationally? And then, are you saving jobs? The third question is, are you able to advance technology? And then they gave that assignment, which is a plus, which is close to the best, an A4, and then a B3, and then a C2, and then D, which is 1. And by that, they mean that the program failed. Then just to give from the study again, when people speak about the size of US industrial policy, they were able to quantify. So the US has two levels of government, just like for us here in Kenya, federal and state. In this case, for Kenya, it'd be national and then county governments. For national, for federal, their consumer costs that are identified. So there are trade measures. Then there is a national program, a defense program, which is the DARPA, and then the other programs on solar, other programs of Innovation and Competition Act, provisions of Innovation and Competition Act, which entails other industrial R&D, but secondly, they also entail semiconductor manufacturing. Then the second part is state industrial policies. So the corporate tax exemptions for specific states, and then property abatements, cash and grants and loans, and then the free services. So in total, when they quantified it in $20 equivalent, the total size of industrial policy as a share of the budget for federal was 2.4%. So, and then for the state was close to 1%. And that spent 4.2, so that's the equivalent of size of industrial policy, close to on an annual basis. So as discussed, there were several strands of industrial policy, which is one, through trade measures, through targeted subsidies to specific farms, and then additionally, the last one is so we are going to start with the first one, which is industrial policy through trade measures. The way politicians or policymakers justify industrial policy through trade measures is that out for reasons, which is the cost is not directly does not come directly from the budget, and the claim is that, which is a fallacy, is that tariffs are always passed. Tariffs are always paid by foreigners, but if you look at the point of incidence for tariffs, it's actually in the end it's paid by the domestic buyer. Then protection is said to will save domestic jobs, because if there's an overseas industry that is supplying domestic goods, the argument would be that jobs that those the tariff itself will allow the domestic farms to thrive. But they ignore the fact that jobs lost in downstream industries must pay for higher priced inputs. Because the way the global markets work nowadays is that there's a global value chain, and there's no single value chain that is in one country. There's global value chain. So what farms do is to buy intermediates, value add, and then be able to send the same goods outside. Then the third claim is always that foreign exports are characterized as unfair, they're subsidized, dumped, or based on stolen technology, owing to industrial policy abroad. This is largely targets Chinese because a larger part of Chinese manufacturing is subsidized, from steel to fuel to many other parts. And then the national security arguments that are invoked to preserve the domestic industry. Here in Kenya, national security is not a large part of national economic policy conversations, but in the United States, it's a big policy question, and the number of times that has been invoked is tremendous. So the to explain, one of the case studies that they focused on in the study is the issue of steel. And in steel, the US government used many measures across different administrations, and 6 measures in this case that they identified, which is the anti-dumping duty, countervailing duty, the import and export restraints, trigger price mechanism, which is the trigger price mechanism is that anytime steel is imported at lower prices than the domestic price, there is always an investigation to determine whether those prices are subject of are not whether those prices have met all the import requirements. Then there's a safeguard duty, and then the national security tariff. The national security tariff is, as for many people remember, the first Trump administration that was invoked and against a Japanese steel maker. And then, so in the evaluation, they examined the data. So they looked at the production of raw steel, and then they looked at the imports of steel mill products, and also looked at the exports. So largely in 30 years, when all these programs were in place, the production of raw steel did not go up substantially. In fact, in some years, especially during the financial crisis, it went down. As you can see, the thick blue line is the production of raw steel, has remained constantly the same. Second question is the imports of steel, the steel mill products were not largely affected by these measures. And then the third is a question about the exports. It remained the same. So after making a provision for these trade measures to enhance US steel, nothing changed substantially. And in the 3 questions that they evaluated, whether the US steel became internationally competitive, it did not. Whether the protection saved jobs at reasonable costs, there are calculations for job creation, the cost by job, that did not change. And then whether that protection advanced the technological frontier of steel production, they also similarly failed outcome. So there are other cases to back up trade measures, industrial policy through trade measures, and you'll be able to read in the book. The second part is now subsidies towards specific targeted farms, industrial policy through subsidies targeted to specific farms. Again, they went to an historical evaluation they looked at some of the some of the history, and after the Great Depression in the 1930s, President Roosevelt created what they call the Tennessee Valley Authority, and they wanted to achieve three things: better agricultural practices, cheap electricity, and also be able to undertake flood control. And it was largely successful. It was huge success. And then subsequently, American policymakers started to see that this is a venture that they can use. So in some of the case examples is that they feature in the study is what they call the synthetic fuel corporation, Soliandra, and then the Christian Dunes. So we'll feature one, which is the synthetic fuel, and then there are others, including Chrysler, Mercedes-Benz, and others. We'll feature two in this case, which is the synthetic fuel corporation and then Chrysler. Then, so synthetic fuel corporation was that there was this big concern in the 19th century, in the 20th century, about whether oil reserves would be exhausted and whether specific investments can be made to ensure that there will be replacement. So there are many studies to look at. One area is what they call the shale, SHALE, as so that was a commitment towards the shale project. And then and the view at that time was to provide a targeted subsidy to a firm that is leading a firm that is leading that technological process. So they're able to look at that commitment, as specific commitments were provided to the shell firm, which is they capitalized at $20 billion at that time in 1947. And then part of what the US government provided was form of loan guarantees and also the purchase of synthetic fuel at prices above market price. And then they had budget outlets for $1 billion. For those who know the technology behind shell oil, is that it's something they call horizontal retort. It's something they call the retort technology. So when they evaluated in the study, when they evaluated the three questions, whether the shale oil became internationally competitive, whether the synthetic fuels corporation created jobs at reasonable cost, and then whether government assistance advanced the technological frontier of shale oil. And in all those categories, they failed. So later, the technology later in the 1980s was a guy called George Michel introduced a commercially successful technology at $6 million. And then the retort that was supported by Synthetic Fuel Corporation never became commercially viable. Remember, government had given loan guarantees and purchase of synthetic fuel at prices above market levels. And even though the $20 billion at that time, which is $3 billion in today's value, in 2020's value, a larger part of it was investors' money, and that also disappeared. So whether they did not create jobs, they did not advance technology, but also they were not commercially viable. But I know some people ask, where the same targeted subsidies, there must be some that were successful, and this is one of them. So Chrysler is a US vehicle manufacturer. In 1980, it was a major employer in specific in specific states. It's also a homegrown American car brand. But if, at that time, there were two options. Either to go to bankruptcy, which means that employees would have to be fired. There were many, and then even this was a major firm. But the US government the US Treasury designed a program, which is there's a federal loan guarantee of $1.5 billion, and it was conditioned on the firm Chrysler raising an additional $2 billion from investors, banks, states, or local governments. And the program, the bailout became successful, and Chrysler was able to introduce a technology that for fuel efficient cars, and the share value went up, and also their vehicles, the vehicle sales, and also expansion. So it became a successful program. Did it make Chrysler nationally and internationally competitive? Yes, and that because the original goal was to ensure that rescue Chrysler from bankruptcy and ensure its survival in the domestic market. And they saw that Chrysler's market share grew after the loan program was introduced in 1980. Even though at that time there was import surges from other countries like Japan. Did guarantees save jobs at reasonable cost? Absolutely. It's the federal loan guarantee of $1.5 billion to save 360,000 jobs. The cost per job saved was 4,600 if it had defaulted. And then the annual wage for workers at that time was $23,000. And the taxpayer exposure per job appeared cheap. So there was a cost benefit, so also successful. Did they guarantee advanced technological frontier? Yes, because Chrysler subsequently after the program from the US Treasury produced more fuel efficient models, and they were able to contribute they contributed to the federal guarantee contributed to significant technological advances. So some programs work, but because we can easily see the reason why this program was able to work, because this is a performance link subsidy. You can only get $1.5 billion if you're able to raise $2 billion. For you to be able to raise $2 billion, there are specific measures that you have to undertake to make the farm more efficient. So these are performance linked. So incentives matter at the end of the day. And then the third issue is the now industrial policy through public and private R&D. So the most known in the study that was featured in the study is the issue of DARPA. The DARPA started in 1950s, which was small staff. They awarded R&D grants to academic and industry partners. The grant decisions were made by these about 100 DARPA program managers who are scientists themselves, They're insulated from political pressure, meaning that those decisions cannot determine those decisions. And then they have a very specific mandate, which is to fund high risk and high reward R&D. They are not funding the specific issues in the market. It's not like incremental improvement. It's somebody with a very big idea. And then they have a tenure, 3 to 5 years tenure. The DARPA, in the study, they've counted more than 30, more than 40 different technologies, from weather satellites to information processing to all manner of things that we know today, that makes us that allows us to that has led to technological advances today. So when they evaluated the DARPA program, whether DARPA helped make US firms, US tech firms internationally competitive, highly successful outcome. The DARPA create jobs at reasonable costs. So when you calculate the high value jobs, and then you calculate those that have been created through the ripple effect, especially through the internet, it's still an highly successful outcome. Did DARPA advance the US technological frontier in multiple industries? It did. And then from aviation to internet to satellites to many other anything that required computing power. So in the end, when they evaluated those 18 different sets of programs, 18 sets, the 18 key projects, there is a mixed picture. There are those that failed, there are those that succeeded, and in the end, there is a specific sort of algorithm that you can get from those that failed and those that succeeded. So like this, the ones who steel workers tend to have very strong unions, and so they have a bigger say in how policies is done. But if you compare to DARPA, which is a small group of a small team with grants, and they are focusing specifically on those high reward, the high risk, high reward kind of projects. You see the sense, or you look at the bailout of Chrysler, for example, and look at the way the performance-linked subsidies can actually help a farm is important. So what are some of those lessons for Kenya? So that first we need to contextualize Kenyan challenges. So first, generally, is that for the size, we are what we call an open and small economy, because with $7 billion of exports, or and a $24 billion import bill, we have very low. Those numbers are the export numbers are low. Secondly, all these goods that are produced do not have what we call, they are not complex products. Complex products are those that have ubiquity, that there is a lot of knowledge that goes into making, and also they tend to be high value. So low industrial complexity. 60% of all manufactured goods fall under what we call low low industrial complex goods, and then another 25 medium. Only slightly 10% are what are considered complex products, complex manufactured. Then the second question for context is premature deindustrialization, which is they are faster. The other side, the other side, the the other parts of the economy are growing at a faster rate than the manufacturing sector. And in this case, service. And for those services, if you look at those services, they are not also what, because they are not like they are not the similar services that you'd expect in the structural transformation part, because structural transformation part is countries go through go through agriculture, they go into light manufacturing, heavy, and then they become now industrialized. They go into services, and those services in those industrialized countries tend to be very high value services, because these ones are jobs services in wholesale, the wholesale and retail, in trading commodities, hospitality. So you not likely find, so it's not something this premature deindustrialization is a significant policy problem. The third issue is that technological capability, which is that ability to upgrade manufacturing capability is also low, and then weak export diversification. So the exports are in fewer goods, and that can easily look at it from the. So what are some of the lessons? One of the things that you see from the evaluation of the 18 different case studies is that if you look at the three areas, the one that worked the most is subsidies through R&D, whether it was public or private. The R&D component worked almost, because that's a larger part. So the research triangle, if you look at the other cases that were featured in the study, so there is a very strong link. So so an ecosystem approach from an R&D perspective would be the most competent manner. Second issue is a question about university and industry, but it has to come from the ecosystem approach. It's not, and that's why you see, so like the way DARPA leads to better information processing, GPS, all these other components that lead to internet, and then the research triangle, these universities that are part of the research triangle, now that ecosystem starts to produce tech firms, and so some of those tech firms are leading global firms, including Google, Apple, and others. Then you target externalities, not firms. So if the problem is skills, you don't provide a specific firm. You target, you build the skills component. If it's infrastructure, if it's the question about technology division. So because the way industrial policy is built around firms, and the externalities, whether the negative externalities or the positive externalities that tend to target these, that you're supposed to target, the policy not ends up working. Export competitiveness focus. Majority, if these sectors are not opened up to the powers of competition or trade. That in the end will not work. And then what obviously not to do, I've emphasized that one, blanket subsidies to farms. Once the industrial policy transfers direct subsidies to farms, they are no longer producing. That is rent seeking. And rent seeking, we have a classical term for it. Rent seeking in this case is another major, is a fashionable word for corruption, which is the state is transferring through policy resources to specific farms. So it has to be performance-based subsidies, sector selection. What you also learn is that majority of these sectors, once they cannot be chosen, the state, these are things that the state cannot decide. This is something that private sector decides, because when private sector can go into a sector, they are putting all resources, they are putting skin into the game, which is be able to face those incentives. And then the question about prestige projects, and then long-term protection. So like the steel model, for example. So the big issue is to form that learning-based industrialization, and the formation of industrial clusters, and then also raise technological, because the focus should not be on just protecting those protecting the focus should not be on just protection solely, should be on capabilities and ecosystem. And then lastly, as I wind up, the principles for design of from this is all forms of industrial policy should have sunset clauses. Secondly, it should be on the basis of performance-based support. And then they should be opened up to competition, especially from international markets. And then institutional independence, like DARPA, for example. They have that DARPA, but the politicians are not able politicians are not able to influence. And then iterative policy learning, which is as policy improves, or on the basis of failures, you're able to innovate and then create a policy that is more sustainable. Thank you so much. Back to you, John. And this is the study for those who would want to read further.
Okay, thanks a lot, Kemboi. So as I try to summarize basically what I picked from this study. So yes, Kemboi has taken us through. No, my camera has disappeared. Yeah. So what Kemboi has done is to take us through a process of learning first from the US in terms of their industrial policy. And we know that obviously the industrial policy is government deliberate action in terms of supporting different sectors of the economy, but basically the industry. So in the US, that has been for the 50 years, what they did, there are three types of industrial policies, and there are those that focus on trade measures, there are those that focus on targeted subsidies, and then the final category was on the private research and development. So in that, obviously, the US had some assessment, and this assessment in terms of the support or government action in strengthening industry looked at three key things. The first one is on the question of competitiveness, and then the second one is obviously on the creation or saving of jobs. and the final one was in terms of the advancement of technology. So these three criteria is what they used. And so Kemboi shared different case studies of each of the three types of industrial policies and how they fared in terms of the assessment. Um, so obviously the steel industry, there was a failure that, and their main focus in the US was on trade measures, but they failed on the three assessments of competitiveness, job creation, uh, and in terms of advancing technology. But there were success stories with Chrysler. So of course for Chrysler, there was a targeted subsidy that helped in terms of bailing it out. And then the final one on R&D was for their defense. Again, another success stories. Now, from all this, what Kemboi showed us is obviously in terms of lessons for Kenya or for any country, obviously, the first thing is to understand our context. And he took us through the context for Kenya from an industrial perspective, the fact that, yes, we have low industrial complexity. It's only about 10% of our industrial products that are of high value or that are complex. There are questions around limited technology capabilities, weak export diversification, and so on. So based on all this, the lessons that Kenya should pick from the 50 years of industrial policy in the US, that the focus should be more on, for instance, with regard to subsidies, it should be based more on what he mentioned or what he referred to as performance-based subsidies. Obviously, if we have subsidies that are not well designed and that are not linked to performance, that will obviously lead to distortion of the market and corruption and corruption basically. So in the design of these policies, what Kemboi mentioned, obviously, um, there's need to ensure that the focus is not just on protection of, let's say, our manufacturing industry, but indeed the focus should be more on productivity. And then there are issues about skill development, um, technology diffusion, and so on. So as a way of summary, those are some of the things that I picked from Kemboi's presentation. So I'll pause there then now and invite you all for questions or comments. So in case there's something that can be mentioned that is not clear, you are free to ask that. You can obviously unmute or just raise your hand and I'll be able to pinpoint you. And yes, then you can ask whatever question that you have. So far from the chat box, I only see one question, so I'll just read it out. And this is from Steve, who is a colleague here at the IEA. So what Steve asks is, are there specific industries top of mind that you would propose Kenya's industrial policy to aim at or focus on for targeted subsidies? Yeah, so I hope that's clear. So from the top of your mind, Kemboi, are there, in terms of things or lessons that Kenya should pick in terms of advancing our industrial policy, which industry should be targeted? Should the government target for subsidies? I think that's what Steve is asking. Yeah, I guess as people are warming up to either ask their queries or seek clarification, maybe Kemboi, you can quickly respond to Steve's question.
Yes. So Steve, some of those specific so there are three categories of goods that are in Kenya's, what you'd basically say they're low industrial complexity, which is 60%. there are other goods which almost 29-30% that have higher industrial that are mid-tier industrial complexity, and then the 10% industrial complexity. If public money was to be used, that would mean that to target those that are in mid-tier industrial complexity. But again, because in the entire process, mechanism design is very important. And mechanism design in this case is incentives. First, we should not commit the cardinal rule, the cardinal sin of picking winners. There should be a process that actually allows a decision to be arrived that says these are the specific sectors that needs that specific focus. And in that case, those incentives should be on that basis that private sector money, which is shareholder oversight, private sector money comes into play, because no private sector person would want to burn their fingers. Because if government is led to decide, because like the one of steel, government has had a bigger and in the steel example that is in the paper, that you'll end up with the same results. Exports are not improving, local production is not going up, and jobs are not also going up. So that is the essence. And I think similar to Kenya, that is where we've been. It's been buy Kenya, protect. If you look at historical text, documents written before 1980, it was to protect infant industry. Now, the argument is to buy Kenya, build Kenya. It doesn't matter whether that is competitive or not. So that's the challenge. We should not pick winners. We should not commit a cardinal sin, which is to pick winners. There should be a process. In this case, like the US on DARPA, and then incentives matter. So performance-based subsidies are the ones that matter. But in the end, the ones that allows Kenya to build that are R&D specific, and also allows Kenya to build an ecosystem are the most preferred methods of industrial policy in this case, to answer your question. Back to you, John.
Okay, thanks for that. Steve, I hope that's clear. So I see Emmanuel Zand. Yeah, so Emmanuel, please unmute and pose your question or comment. Emmanuel, can you hear me? Yes, go ahead.
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay then.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Leo, for that presentation. I've been having a bit of a challenge in seeing your presentation, but I was able to get some of your arguments. I was just wondering, maybe I missed it. Other than those interventions that this report is highlighting, is there any mention about regulation? And I'm saying this because we recently saw the Kenya Association of Manufacturers publish a very detailed report on the number of licenses and permits that are choking our manufacturing sector. I felt from looking at that report that rather than active involvement of the government in trying to intervene through research and all those measures that you've highlighted, it will help much more if they just did something about this numerous regulations and licenses and taxation that is making it difficult for our manufacturing sector to be competitive. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Emmanuel. Yes, I hope Leo, you've noted Emmanuel's question. I also have one. So what I'm wondering, Kemboi, given obviously Kenya's industrial context, as you noted it, where should that catalyst come from in terms of advancing our industrial policy? Should it be based on the different sectors of, I mean, the different industries, or should that be targeted? So I'm just wondering, yeah, where should that catalyst, that trigger come from? Yeah. I don't see
Yes.
any other, so you please
Okay.
speak.
So
Go ahead, Kemboi.
yes. So to answer your question, Emmanuel, we've reiterated that protectionism, and the ability to allow competition. In this case, that competition as an economic policy is important to allow those price discovery, but also allow sectors to fully survive, that cannot fully survive without government policy, to be able to be weeded out. So that's important. So here, you are just reviewing the report on the basis of the strengths and weaknesses of industrial policy, and why industrial policy in some cases works and did not work. We are fully aware about Kenya's state. We know, and I've reiterated in this similar series, that some specific farms left Kenya because at one point when they did the regulatory checklist or compliance list, is that they had to report, one, that they were being regulated by 18 government agencies. So that when you count all of them, 18 government agencies targeting the same farm. And obvious, that's in regulation what is called overreach. Because the basis of government regulation are not more than not more than 4 factors, which is, so competition is a big problem in Kenya, and that's notwithstanding, and competition, and then on top of it, there are many other problems that are built on top of it. So like, there's a discussion one time that if you get an unfair rule, or whether from the national government or the county government, there should even be a place where a farm can go without necessarily having go to High Court and wait for 3 years for that specific rule, for a determination that on that specific rule. So there are many problems, and competition being one of them. And given that some of it revolve around captured interest, around the way policy is captured to serve specific farms, some of it just revolve around regulation overreach. So like the ICT sector is one of the most overregulated sectors in Kenya. But if you look at, in the end, what they are regulating are not things that would either yield consumer surplus, or so there's a big problem, and that is, so a larger part of deregulating would form a basis for growth of Kenya's industrial policy. There are many other issues that also revolve around the same rules, the way rules change from time to time. And part of the problem is that some of these rules that are tied to fees and levies change through the finance bill. Some of those rules, again, change by the virtue of that specific agencies. So like if those agencies exist in environment, the ministries have more convening power in parliament to push for subsidiary legislation that not necessarily works for innovation or protecting jobs, or even along that, if you even take the three specific rules, or even advancing Kenya's technological position. So that's a reality. And that the CAM annual regulatory survey is one of those reports that shows why that is a big policy question. So the World Bank also focused last year published a report that the Kenya Economic Update that was themed on competition policy. And something like between 0.8 to 1.2 of points of growth is shaved off by not having enough competition. Competition. So yeah, so we're just saying that the two are not mutually are not the same, but competition is important element. That's why, because the IE is also a free market because free markets allow us to get the producer to get both a surplus, but also the consumer to get that surplus. And without that, whenever there is a problem in the way government is playing with rules, and majority of the problems for Kenya relate to collection of revenue, appropriation in aid. And a larger part of those, another part of it is also on captured policy interest, which is also still a big problem. Yeah. Back to you, John. Oh, the second question from John about what would be some of those sectors because we have the three sections, which is the low tier, low value manufacturing, low value industrial complexity goods, manufacturing goods with low value industrial complexity, mid-tier, which is around 20-something%, and then the 10% for high complexity. I still think that part of the catalytical part is to incentivize or force more farms to produce goods that have for them to move from that low to mid. And the only way to can move from low to mid is if the current industrial policy action is tied to or around the performance base, on that performance basis, around those issues. And there's also, just to tie back to what the question from John and Emmanuel is, the World Bank did a diagnostic of Kenyan farms, manufacturing farms in 2016. That study, they realized that a larger part of Kenyan farms are what we call the laggards, which are farms that will not survive without government policy. And then there is a group of farms which could compete in upper and middle income economies, places like Chile, South Africa, and other places. So that to allow the environment, the environment that Kenya needs to go is where the existence of those farms that cannot survive without government policy, but also government policy that allows specific objectives to be attained, that building an ecosystem, that iterative policy learning that allows government to improve policy. And also that these specific subsidies or performance-based, those specific, that specific, these targeted subsidies are on specific issues, or on specific things and on specific results. Yeah. But in the end, we should not commit that sin of selecting winners, because that is something that politicians who have a bigger convening power, policymakers who have a bigger convening power would be able to select. And they've selected that because the current industrial policy drafted in 2012 selected some specific sectors, but those sectors are not, with those specific subsidies are not matching up to the expectation. Thank you. Back to you, John.
Thanks, Kambui. Yeah, I don't see any other questions. So this is a call for any final questions or comments. Otherwise, Kambui, you can prepare to make your final remarks.
Sorry, just thank you, Leo, for that response. You mentioned a 2012 industrial policy. Is that the current policy we have on industry? Or if there's any, you could also guide me on where I can find more information on this. Sorry for interrupting you, John. Thank you.
No problem. Yeah, Manuel.
Yeah.
So yes, Kembo, you can clarify that, and then you will make your final.
Yes. So yes, that's true, Emmanuel. We had in December we had a webinar to review that. I can share you the presentation and also share you the industrial policy. Michelle will be able to share with you the policy itself, the national industrialization policy, but also our presentation or our views on the policy. Yes, a policy exists, and in the annex of that policy, you will be able to see sectors that policymakers at that time decided that this would be Kenya's leading frontier sectors. Yes, and when we looked at it, those sectors are not Kenya's leading frontier sectors. So, despite the fact that those specific policy actions were provided for that. So, we'll in the next series, we'll be able to discuss around this Iran war, the nexus of industrialization around this Iran war, and what are some of the key things that we could expect, or how it would affect manufacturing, and where possible, with evidence, provides policy. What are some of the policy things that would go directly to government, that government should take up as they look at that. Secondly, is that the importance of this conversation is to be able to build a repository of conversations, of policy conversations around manufacturing, and to be able to be, and we value your feedback, and therefore the more we get questions and the more it is interactive, or the more we get suggestions on some of the things that we discuss, would be an important thing. So we intend to keep this, provided we have a quorum, and a quorum is 10. We intend to keep this going, because we also and we into the possible near future. So then the next one would be on the next one would be on that question. So as I conclude, for us, some specific studies like this one done by the Peterson Institute, this think tank from the US, is an important study that that can be replicated, but also it shows us the 50 years of experience, what 50 years of experience can bring to the table. So this is, for us, is an important learning, but this is something that we thought that this is not something we'll just review on our own, but to be able to bring it to our members to discuss. Thank you so much. Back to you, John.
Yeah, thank you, Kemboy. So let's appreciate Kemboy. Maybe you can click on that icon. I mean the React icon. Yeah. Thank you, Kemboy, for that. And actually, as he mentioned, so this is the third webinar on Industry 254 conversations, and of course we had a couple of those similar webinars towards the end of last year and the last quarter. So I think in total there could be about 7 or 8. So feel free to interact with those in case you've missed any of those, and then based on your feedback, we will know which other areas or areas that you guys would that you'd want us to focus on. We're also reviewing some of these discussions that we've had, and no doubt for some of these we'll probably extend them in terms of carrying out specific research just to expound on the issues that we've discussed so far. So we value your feedback and looking forward to receiving that either on today's webinar or even in the previous or in the past webinars that we've shared. So of course, this presentation, I think the link has already been provided by Michelle. So feel free to interact with it some more during your free time. Just to mention that the PIIE is a membership organization, and there are many more benefits that you will derive from being a member of the PIIE, whether as an individual or even as a corporate, in addition to some of the things, whether it's our webinars and the research products that we churn out every so often. And those benefits are actually well spelled out in our website, but you can also get in touch with our communications officers, and they can clarify or basically share some more on the benefits that you derive as a member. There are many more upcoming webinars that are lined up, and so feel free to periodically visit our website or our social media platforms for updates on those webinars. Obviously, in the month of April and May, most of those will be discussing the budget and other related aspects of public finance. So feel free to basically look forward to those webinars. The Industry 254 conversations is monthly, so again, you can look out for this. And Kembe already mentioned that the next one is likely to focus on the impact of the war in Iran and the Middle East war and its impact on the industry. But those will be shared obviously in our social media platforms.